Hello, my name is Jean and I am a knitter. I am currently waiting to hear the results of the evaluation of my notebook full of samples and swatches and a mitten and writing and answering questions that fill the 3-inch binder that I shipped off to the Knitters Guild Association for evaluation. I'm expecting the results back in, maybe 3 weeks or so, might be longer. In the meantime, I am working on what they call civilian knitting. This is a Stephen West shawl, and I think it's going to be my Rhinebeck shawl. And today, I wanted to talk to you about something that I had a very positive experience with. I just took point protectors off my knitting because in a couple of increases, I'm going to have over 1,000 stitches on the needles for one row. Since I wad my knitting up and shove it into a bucket tote, I realized, without having a disaster, that it was probably time for me to put point protectors on the ends of my circular needles because they were not long enough to, as I used to, tie in a knot and stick into the ball of yarn and use that to keep my knitting in place. I have not had a horrible disaster where I pull my knitting out of the bag and have the knitting fall off one or both of the points of the needles, causing much trial and tribulation. Because a little voice told me, it's probably time to put point protectors on. And a while back, because I just wanted to keep track of how many stitches I was actually dealing with, I had a little voice tell me, why don't you put in a stitch marker at the end of this row because you've done your counting and you know how many stitches are on this row and you won't have to repeat that effort if you mark the row. So I did. I have had that little voice tell me, you probably ought to put in a lifeline. And because I have Xiaogu needles, I can do so. Xiaogu needles have a neat little feature in that at the base of the cable, there's a hole. It's a little teeny tiny hole and it will not show on camera, but I use Easy Count Guideline, which is sold to needleworkers. It is a thin monofilament, like a fishing line, but it is bright red. I tried fishing line and realized that, number one, the monofilament that was a bright color was often dyed with something that would crock, which means the dye will rub off onto another surface, usually your knitting. And I said, this is not going to work. But the Easy Count can easily be threaded through this hole, and then you fasten one end, and as you knit, a lifeline is automatically placed through your stitches for you perfectly. You don't even have to think about it. That's one of the things I love about Xiaogu needles. If you cannot find the Easy Count, not having a needlework store in brick and mortar near you, you can also use dental floss. It's hard to find unwaxed dental floss, but just plain old dental floss will work. I will say you need to thread it through a needle or be blessed with much better eyesight than I currently have to get it to go through. And watch, I'm going to get it on the first try. Ta-da! So this will work also. And my knitting will have a hint of minty freshness. As if I care. But it also works very well as a lifeline because it is not prone to break like a thread might. Lifelines will save you because you put them in after you have completed one repeat of a complicated pattern or a significant row, or just anytime you really think, I might have to do some ripping and I want to know exactly what row I am on when I rip back. Maybe you've done cables and you don't want to have to redo that cable, but you want to make sure that's marked. So you run a lifeline. The other thing that I find to be very, very useful, and when the little voice says, have you checked the pattern recently? I do that. I had gotten to the point where, because I'm weighing my ball of yarn regularly at the start and the end of each row that I knit, I know that I am using up about 6 grams of yarn with every row. I know how many grams I have left, and I realized I could do about 6 more rows. I no longer need these stitch markers. I then was thinking that I would have to do an I-cord bind off, and I wanted to verify with Stephen if it mattered if I did the I-cord bind off on a right side or wrong side row. And watched a video. Stephen says, oh, you can do it on either side. Well, I knew that. Which one do you want? Then I looked at the pattern, and the pattern says, well, knit till it's as long as you want. I was going to knit till I ran out of yarn, and then knit 6 rows of, oh dear, he's seen that squirrel. I can't continue. He will not be quiet. Ah, the joys of dog ownership. And after multiple attempts, we are back again. Bonbon's full name is Bonbon Defender of the Yard. I was talking about that little voice telling me it's time to check the pattern again, which I paid attention to, and I checked the pattern and discovered that while I had enough yarn for 6 rows, and was planning simply to continue in pattern until the yarn ran out, that the pattern actually wanted me to end with 6 rows of garter stitch. So I dodged a bullet, and I have enough yarn for 6 rows. I am still to continue with my increases, thus going a little further into the thousands, but not really. It'll be less than 50 more stitches, I think. But if I hadn't checked the pattern then, I would not have been able to complete it as designed with my 3 rows of garter stitch that continue the theme of the garter stitch border around the shawl with the bind off in the I-cord cast on at the bottom, which will add a lovely smooth edge to the bottom and will set off the zigzag edge, because it does end in a zigzag, this Pogona shawl. And with 3 full skeins of yarn and an extra increase on each side, I think it will be good for my wingspan, which is, I have a 6-foot wingspan. I have very long arms for my height. Sometimes that causes problems, but because I knit my own sweaters, it just means I pay attention and make the sleeves a little longer. So when the little voice tells you, it's probably a good idea to fill in the blank, do that thing. Because I don't think you ever regret doing something to make your knitting a little easier or to help you identify what you are doing. If you're doing something wrong, if you want to change, well, figure it out before it's too late. Here's my counting stitch marker, ta-da. And I no longer need these because I'm not changing back and forth from stockinette and reverse stockinette. But here's something else I could be doing, which I chose not to because it's a shawl and it doesn't have to fit. These are barber cords, named after the person who popularized them. They are simply very flexible, slightly elastic tubes that you fit over the points of your knitting needles, and they will stretch. And then you can slide your knitting onto the barber cord, and it will be long enough and flexible enough to show you both the shape and the size of your knitting. So you could, if you wanted, try on a circular sweater mid-project and not lose a single stitch. And if you even wanted to, because of the way circular needles work, you can almost knit your way off the barber cord if you switch to a different needle. But you could, which is kind of fun. But as you see, they fit on very snugly, so you're not really at a risk of having the whole deal fall apart and you lose your stitches off the needle and then they don't go onto the barber cord. But the barber cords are just really useful mid-project try-on tool that lets you determine, oh, well, this is not going to fit the way I want it to, so let me take it back to my lifeline and change the way I increase or decrease or do the pattern repeats or whatever it is that you need to do. So when the little voice inside of you says, I wonder how much yarn I have left, you can use a simple kitchen scale and determine $40 grams of yarn. Yes, I know. Times 6 is 36, but it's not going to leave me enough to do one full more row. And because I am increasing, it could be more than 6 grams per row. So I have a cushion. Oh, what a lovely feeling. No disasters in the offing. As long as I listen to my little voice, use my point protectors, check the pattern, and keep track of where I am using my stitch markers. It's so nice feeling like you're not going to have an oops and you're going to have something that you are proud of. So that's all I have to talk about today. Listen to the little voice. The little voice is usually right. Follow that little voice. You're not crazy, you're just cautious. And keep knitting.